This is David Gray, Mandan, North Dakota. Today is February 8th, 2023. Our battle cry will be Remember Janie McCrea. To modern Americans, this battle cry may not be quite as familiar as Remember the Alamo, Remember the Maine, Remember Pearl Harbor, or Remember 9/11. But as a result of her bloody murder in 1777, Miss Jane McCrea became a rallying cry against the British and their Indian allies at the time of the American Revolutionary War. The facts are that Jane McCrea was an American woman, a Tory, who was killed by Native American warriors serving alongside a British Army expedition under the command of John Burgoyne during the war. Engaged to a loyalist officer serving under Burgoyne, her death led to widespread outrage in the 13 colonies and was used by patriots as part of their anti British propaganda campaign. Jane McCrea was born in Bedminster, New Jersey in 1752 and moved to Sarasota, New York, where she became engaged to David Jones, a loyalist, during the Saratoga campaign of 1777. McCrea left her brother's home to join Jones, who was stationed at Fort Ticonderoga. While staying at Fort Edward, McCrea was abducted, killed, and scalped by a group of Native American warriors. But those facts may not be as accurate as we shall see. Upon receiving word of the incident, Burgoyne attempted to punish the culprits, but was dissuaded from doing so because the Indians were their allies. Her death was widely reported throughout the 13 colonies. The killing of McCrea also inspired American resistance to the British, contributing to the failure of the Saratoga campaign. McCrea's life and death eventually became part of American folklore, with pantomimes, poems, folk songs, plays, and novels being written about her. The first reports of McCrea's death portrayed her as an unfortunate casualty of the war. Yet later that year, references to McCrea's murder appeared frequently in colonial newspapers, and as her story circulated, its horror heightened. Soon McCrea was said to have been a British captive murdered mercilessly by Indian devils in the employ of the British. And the story continues. McCrea was murdered in her wedding gown by Indians entrusted to escort her from a friend's residence near Fort Edward across the battlefield into the loving arms of her Tory fiance, David Jones. Her escorts did not deliver on their promise, however, disagreeing over who deserved the largest share of the reward of rum. The Indians raped, scalped, and murdered McCrea, though she prayed on her knees for mercy. It was British policy to pay for American scalps, and therefore, in a cruel irony, McCrea's long golden tresses were presented to Jones, her fiance, for payment. Jones recognized his beloved scalp, but fulfilled the duty and paid the reward. According to historians Jeremy Ingalls and Greg Goodale, writing in the American Quarterly in 2009, the saga and myth of Jane McCrea represents a sterling example of the politics of national revenge. Not unlike the slogans already remembered in this presentation, the historians make the case that revenge should be understood not primarily as a moral wrong, but instead as a historically conditioned, circulating discourse of power. The McCrea myth suggests that by persuading Americans their nation had been wronged, it was possible to discipline them and motivate them to support the war and engage in violent acts against the enemy. Propagandists fill citizen soldiers with hatred for the enemy and then encourage them to release this hatred in explosive acts of violence. To transform McCrea's story into an effective war rhetoric, propagandists had to rework it, revamp it, and embellish it. In this way, McCrea became a subject of propaganda that helped Americans win the war for independence. McCrea's death was first and foremost a revenge story. The story of McCrea's death was an enduring cultural fiction after the Revolutionary War. Indeed, generations of American citizens following the Revolution found meaning and order in her tale, which by the plot remained more or less the same, but was repeatedly unearthed and reinvented to serve the needs of the moment. Historians Ingalls and Goodale also say that the Jane McCrea story drew on the conventions of captivity narratives, literary romanticism, sentimental fiction, and classic fables. Her story was further embellished later by the able literary hands of David Ramsay, Mercy Otis Warren, Joel Barlow, Sarah Hale, and even Washington Irving. Her story was canonized in art history with John Vanderlyn's 1804 painting, The Death of Jane McCrea, which appeared earlier in this presentation. The tale was retold in history books and a popular biography. By the mid 19th century, Jane McCrea had become a national icon. In recent years, historians have suggested that the myth of the murder of Jane McCrea may not align with the facts. Researcher John Coster, in an article in Military History in 2000, claims that Jane McCrea may have been inadvertently killed by American soldiers shooting at McCrea's Indian captors. No contemporary images of Jane McCrea exist. However, a British officer who knew Jane remarked that she was plain but not unattractive. In contrast, the images that have been created since the time of Jane McCrea have portrayed her as a beautiful girl, like a Gibson girl, like in this image from 1912. Her image has also been used for commercial purposes, such as these ads for selling life insurance. This has been a sad ending for a 17-year-old girl. Thanks for your attention.